Hi, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about a subject that is rarely ever talked about, but it's an important subject that I think is worth bringing up since those of us who are wanting and desiring a relationship, we all want to be in a relationship that is healthy. And sometimes we are in a relationship or we end up meeting someone who's not too healthy for us. And so, I feel the subject is worth talking about. You just met someone new recently, or you've been dating someone for a while and you've noticed something a little off with your partner. If you're a woman, you sense that your partner is overly close with his mother, or if you're a man, your partner seems to be overly close with her father. You wonder if it's your imagination that you frequently feel you're in competition with your partner's parent, and you sometimes feel frustrated and don't know if you're really dating your partner or their parent. Well, it may not be your imagination. While it's good for children to have warm, loving relationships with their parents, when do these relationships become unhealthy and even toxic? The answer is when the attachment to their parents leads to an unhealthy dependence that continues well into adulthood to the extent they display a lack of maturity and self sufficiency. Their identity and sense of self becomes entangled and enmeshed with their parents. When this happens, the boys are often described as mama boys and the girls are the daddy girls. Today, we're going to talk about signs of a mama's boy and daddy's girl. The signs will be represented by the spelling of the words being controlled. And folks, it's not a coincidence that I came up with the two words being controlled because truly if you're a mama's boy or daddy's girl, you are being controlled by your parents. Okay. Okay, so B for bratty. They were spoiled as a child by their parents and thus became a spoiled brat. They grow into adults with a sense of entitlement to be taken care of by their parents, just like the way they were taken care of. I'm sorry, they were taken care of by their partners, just as like the way they were taken care of by their parents when they were children. Let me say this again. They were spoiled brats as a child by their parents and thus became a spoiled brat. They grow into adults with a sense of entitlement to be taken care of by their partners, just like they were taken care of by their parents when they were children. So as adults, they still behave bratty because they got used to getting everything they wanted as kids. They expect the same special treatment from their partners to serve and pamper them like their parents did. E for expecting. They are expecting their partners, to be just like their parents, unfairly comparing their partners to their own parents. They often become disappointed when they find out their partners are unique and don't act like their parents or measure up to them. This can be problematic, especially in a romantic relationship, because they fail to recognize and appreciate the true essence of who their partners are and instead are insisting on wanting their partners to conform and change to be like their parents. I for immature. They are immature and behave in childish ways because their parents didn't foster their maturity, personal, or spiritual growth. This immaturity is especially noticeable whenever they are around their parents. They become submissive and subservient to their parents' needs. And for neglect, they neglect the needs of the partners because they are constantly prioritizing their parents' needs over their partner's needs. Their partners feel often neglected, disrespected, and devalued by their partners. G for grandiose behavior. They feel a sense of exaggerated self importance. This often leads to them having an excessive need for attention all the time because of their parents' over nurturing and over admiration of them as children. As a result of this overwhelming showering of attention from their parents, they became overly dependent on this constant display of attention and need for validation. In romantic relationships, they may react with extreme jealousy and feel threatened if their partner shows any attention to others. They are constantly in a state of high alert, ready to compete with others for their partner's attention. C for controlled by parents. They are controlled emotionally and sometimes financially by their parents. Their parents tend to be narcissistic and have a strong need to be in control. Narcissistic people are considered toxic because they don't respect the boundaries of others and are emotionally abusive. And emotional abuse has long term mental and physical effects. If you haven't seen my previous video, The Long Term Effects of Emotional Abuse, please check it out. Growing up with a narcissistic parent, they were unaware that they had been controlled by their parents. And their parents' compulsion to control their children's lives continues to be a destructive pattern of behavior, even throughout their children's adulthood. Counseling is needed to heal from those years of emotional abuse by their parents. And I just want to note here, not only does your partner need counseling from years of abuse being controlled by their parents, but obviously the parents who are narcissistic, they also need counseling as well. Okay. And I just want to stop right here for a few minutes and talk about a situation, a mama's boy that I had dated. I had dated a few in my lifetime. And so this is one of the, I would say, I think there was three, but this is one of the three that I dated. And this is early when I was in my I was in my mid-20s. My mother had called me at work one day. She was working at the time at her workplace. She had a female coworker friend that had a son who was in his late 20s who've never been on a date. He was I remember he was a pilot for a popular airline, and so my mother's coworker friend suggested that they set us up on a blind date. So my mother called me and said, "Would that be okay with you? That I have a female coworker friend uh, who wants to set up a blind date for her son and for me." I said, "Sure, why not?" Right? I've never dated a pilot. I thought it was an interesting idea, and just see what happens. So they made arrangements, and we went on a date, and we did get along very well. He was a very nice gentleman, from what I remember, and we dated for about, I wouldn't say about 2 weeks. We dated for about 2 weeks, and so by the second week is when things started getting really crazy. Okay, I remember one afternoon his mother called. I was sharing an apartment with a roommate at the time, uh, and he had stayed over. And I remember one afternoon his mother called, and they had about a 20-minute conversation. I could tell that he was upset. He was emotionally upset talking to his mother on the phone. When they hung up the phone, I asked him what happened, and he disclosed to me what they talked about. And apparently, she was very distraught and very upset and jealous that him and I were dating each other. Believe it or not, she was upset about that. Okay, and she also proceeded, while she was on the phone with him, she also proceeded to question him on whether how often he's been home, if he's had time to spend with his male roommate, and all this personal stuff that really I feel was really none of her business. Okay, but of course he answered her, and he said that he hasn't been home because he's been traveling. As a pilot, he did have a busy schedule, so he was rarely ever home, right? Um, but when he was home, he did spend some time with his roommate. But in this situation, he had said that he hasn't been home and he hasn't really had spending time with his roommate. And then what he shared with me was really shocking. She had said to him, she started crying and getting really emotionally upset. She said to him, if he doesn't, she feels that he loved me more than he loved than her. In other words, she was competing for his love with me. We've only dated for 2 weeks. We were not that emotionally invested, okay? But the mother started to feel his mother started to feel awfully jealous. And maybe she felt like she was, I don't know what her issues were, whether she was estranged, she didn't have a good relationship with her husband, or I'm not sure what happened. But she said to him before they hung up the phone that he needs to either break up with me or she would commit suicide. I kid you not, folks. She said to him, she threatened him and said, if you don't break up with her, I will commit suicide. So by the time they hung up the phone, he was really shaken by that conversation. I could tell he was emotionally upset, and agonizing over his decision. And of course, I wasn't going to influence his decision one way or another, even though I knew what the right decision was. I knew his mother was clearly out of line, clearly disrespectful, clearly, uh, inappropriate behavior. Okay. And so after about 10, 15 minutes, he was actually in tears too, by the way. He was crying. I tried consoling him. But after about 15 minutes of agonizing, he finally said to me in a tearful manner that he feels that he needs to break up with me. He doesn't want to see his mother commit suicide, and he had to break up with me and run back home to see her. Okay. Now, I just want to add that I don't think he lived with his. I think he no, because he had a roommate. He didn't live with his mother. They didn't live. He lived in a different state. I remember this because my mother and I only lived like 10 minutes away from each other, but he lived in a different state, so he needed to rush, catch the next plane, and go see his mother so she doesn't commit suicide. But he did call her back and tell her that he was gonna break up with me. So, fortunately, I wasn't too emotionally invested in the relationship, so I understood the situation, and it was a shame that he made that decision, but what are you gonna do, right? As an adult, I have to respect his decision. I may not agree with it, and who knows whether we would have worked out long term, right? But at the same time, I, you know, it is what it is, and so he picked his mother over me. So that was one example of my one out of three examples of a mama's boy, clearly being controlled by his parents emotionally. Clearly. Okay, next letter O for overly protective. They are overprotective of their parents. After years of being emotionally manipulated and controlled by their parents, they believe their parents can do no wrong in their eyes. They tend to idolize their parents and even fail to see their parents' flaws and imperfections. They will defend their parents even when they are in the wrong and take their sides over their partner's sides in times of conflict. Okay? Which is also, very hurtful if you're in a relationship with someone like this. Doesn't matter who's right or wrong. Their parents could be clearly in the wrong, but because they are emotionally tied and because that's all they knew growing up, they don't know that their parents are toxic or dysfunctional. That's all they know. And so they think their parents are perfect. They've idolized them to the point that they don't think there's anything wrong with their parents. So if you end up in an argument with your partner's parent, your partner's going to pick their parent over you all the time. And if you've experienced that, then you know what I'm talking about. Okay. N for needy. They come across as very needy in their relationships with their parents. They have low self-esteem and need constant praise and affection to feel valued. Their excessive needs and demands to feel valued can feel very draining for their partners. Okay, so let me just stop right here. If you're in a relationship with a mama's boy or a daddy's girl, if you notice they're very needy, and they are constantly wanting your affection, praise, and attention, it's because that's that's the way they were. That's the kind of relationship they had with their parents, and that's why they have low self-esteem. And so, if you're in a relationship with someone like this, it's not your imagination if you feel uh, frequently drained, frequently emotionally drained with your partner, because it just seems like it's never enough. That they always want this constant need of attention, and they're very needy. Okay, T for trust issues. They have problems with trusting their partners and are usually insecure. They have the anxious attachment style personality where they feel worried about how their partners feel about them and fear abandonment. So they constantly require reassurance from their parents, from their partners, excuse me, to show that they care. This behavior usually stems from the parents who were over nurturing and didn't teach the child to be responsible and self sufficient. Okay, so again, if you're in a relationship with a mom's boy or a daddy's girl, you'll notice that they have trust issues. Okay. Um, their parents never instilled in them any kind of responsibility or teach them to be self-sufficient. So they are highly dependent on their parents for everything. Um, um, and so that's why they become this anxious attachment style personality, where they're constantly needing reassurance. Okay, R for resides with parents. They may still live with their parents because they can live rent free and continue having their parents take care of them. So they don't have to grow up and become a responsible, mature adult. Okay, so in my situations, I'm thinking back now. In the three situations that I've had, the three mama's boys that I've dated in the past, none of them live with their parents. Uh, but I know I have heard of people that dated a mama's boy, excuse me, or a daddy's girl that do live with their parents. So there are situations where your partner may still be living at home. Obviously, it's a red flag, folks. If you meet someone new and you find out that they're still living with their parents, and let's say they're over 40 years old. Now, I do want to say here, in certain situations, it may be justified if temporarily your partner moves back home, if they were laid off from a job or the economy crash, right? Or something significant that happens that causes them to temporarily uh, not be financially stable for a while. They may choose to move back home for a few months or so. That's a different situation. But we're clearly what we're talking about here is a situation where your partner has never left home. Okay, they've never lived on their own, and they're still living at home with their parents. Okay, O for over emotional. They have trouble identifying their own feelings and tend to overreact in challenging situations with little to no emotional regulation. This behavior creates unnecessary stress and drama in relationships with their partners. Communication and conflict resolution are difficult to manage when they are over emotional. L for lack of independence. When there's a lack of independence, the child is over dependent on his or her parent, and usually there is also a lack of boundaries. In a healthy relationship, there's a distinct line of separation between parent and child. However, when there's a lack of independence and boundaries, the two are so enmeshed with each other that the lines are fuzzy or missing. As a result, they grow to rely on and seek their parents for advice and approval for every area of their life. Let me say this again. As a result, they grow to rely on and seek their parents for advice and approval for every area of their life. L, again, for lack of reliance. When there's a lack of reliance, they don't have the confidence to be their own selves, to be authentic, because they were too reliant on their parents for all their decisions during childhood. Okay. As an example, their parents did everything for them, made all the decisions from picking out their clothes or what they wore, what music to listen to, what friends to have, etc. So they lack a sense of who they are because of their identity was entangled with their parents' identity. When they reach adulthood, they have difficulty with making personal decisions, expressing their true selves, and tend to mimic their parents' preferences and behaviors or those of other people they admire. Okay, so now we'll talk about another mama's boy, the second mama's boy that I dated. Um, and this mama's boy was an interesting one. Um, he lived on his own. He had a very, very good job. However, how I found out he was mama's boy, it was that every Friday we had to go home and he had to drop off his laundry to his mother. I am not kidding, folks. Even though he had his own apartment, okay, he still felt the need to, and I don't think he lived far from his mother. I think he lived about maybe 20 minutes away, 20 minutes to a half hour away. Nevertheless, because I dated him for about almost a year. And every Friday he would drop off a whole load, maybe one or two loads of laundry. He literally would just dump the laundry bag of clothes onto the mother's living room floor. And I remember I think I was about 25 years old at the time, and he must have been about 26 or 27. Okay. Clearly, him and I were both living on our own. I had a roommate. I was living in an apartment with a roommate. He was living alone. But yet every Friday, folks, we would go home to see his mother, and he would just drop laundry off for her to take care of. Now, in this situation, actually, his mother was very nice. I actually didn't have any issues with his mother. She did not seem controlling to me. Okay, this was a unique situation. She was a single parent. She was no, actually, yeah, her husband had passed away from a heart attack at an early age, so she was a widower, or is it a widow? I always get the two confused. Anyway, she was her husband had passed away, so she was living alone and with his brother. So his younger brother was still living with the mother, but nevertheless, he would still drop off laundry every Friday. But I did like his mother though. His mother never tried to intrude, uh, and she was very cordial with me, very nice person. I didn't see anything wrong with the mother at all. I actually got along with her very well. But I just thought it was rather odd that he felt the need to still have her do his laundry for him. And there was other traits that he displayed that showed me he was a mama's boy. The fact that he was over emotional, um, that he was very needy, and he was insecure, always wanting to my reassurance that that I cared for him, and he was over extremely over jealous. We had many uh, conflicts over the slightest thing. If I happen to stare at someone too long, or someone or if another guy looked at me or stared at me, he would get really, really upset, highly jealous, not so much angry, not so much anger, but just more or less throwing a temper tantrum at me, worried that I was looking back at the other guy or that I might have been interested in the other guy just because the guy was looking at me. So it was just crazy. Okay. And I think I remember one humorous moment. He had mentioned he had threw a temper tantrum. We were out at Chinatown. I think we were this is when I had lived in New Jersey. We actually drove to New York on my birthday to celebrate my birthday in New York. We wanted to celebrate my birthday at an Italian restaurant. And we were walking across the street, and another young, it was a young guy. I must have been a teenager guy or something. Someone in his late teens, some young guy looking at me. A group of guys walked past us, and one guy just kept looking at me, and I didn't even notice. I was just, walking with them, and my boyfriend at the time got really, really jealous and upset, and started, you know, almost to the point of tears, just worried that I was checking him out, and I wasn't. I don't even know who he was talking about. And to the point that he was so distraught, he said he wanted to put a bag over my head. Okay, not in a abusive way or destructive way, but he just kind of made a flippant comment that he was so upset and so jealous of people looking at me that he did mention to me at that moment while he was upset that he wishes he could put a bag over my head so no one could stare at me. Which, looking back at it now, is pretty funny. Actually, it's kind of humorous, but it's ridiculous. At the time, I didn't think it was funny. I was just I was not happy, very disappointed in his behavior. At the time, I thought he was definitely over the top and um, being overly ridiculous and jealous. Okay. So those, and then the other example of the same gentleman, he didn't really have any opinions of his own. And I think this is what led for me to finally just decided I didn't want to date him any longer, was because I saw that he didn't have a mind of his own. Um, he we were at a party with some of his friends and his relatives, and somehow the subject, we were in a group discussion, and somehow the subject of politics came up, and he did not seem to. I could tell he was uneasy of this discussion, and so when the question came to him, who was his favorite politician, he didn't know what to say, right? But whatever his cousin said, he just mimicked his cousin's opinion. Whoever his cousin liked as a politician, he went along with it and said the same person. So that told me right then and there that he did not have a mind of his own. He hasn't established his own identity. And that was a little troubling to me. It was a red flag because I want to be with someone that has their own mind. Because again, it's like, who am I dating? Am I dating him or his cousin? Who is the person that you're dating, right? Um, so that was another thing that was kind of surprising when I learned that he didn't have a mind of his own. And it didn't help that he was overly jealous and all those other traits that we discussed. So it just was not a good fit. And so that was the second mama's boy I dated a long time ago. Okay, E for emotionally dependent. They are dependent on their parents due to frequent contact with their parents. This excessive communication with their parents creates an unhealthy dependency on their parents for emotional support. In romantic relationships, they lack the discernment to be reserved and private. They have been conditioned as children to tell their parents everything and disclose all the personal details. It could be considered a form of emotional rape where they were being deprived of personal space, respect, and privacy. As an example, their parents would just open their bedroom door without knocking first, or they would listen in on their phone conversations or open their mail, etc. Okay. Now, I don't know, if you've known anyone that actually had this happen to them. I did, I did date a gentleman, a mama's boy that did were we were staying at his mother's house for a few days, and fortunately we were under the covers, so we weren't, you know. But the mother one morning just opened the door, didn't even knock or announce of her being at the door. She just opened the door. Fortunately, we were both under the covers, so there's nothing that was too awkward. But I recall I thought that was totally unacceptable and really uh, awkward behavior displayed by his mom. Actually, we had a discussion about that afterwards. So from that point on, we decided we're going to lock the door. Okay, so actually, the door probably should have been locked to begin with, but um, in normal situations, your partner's parents or your own parents should not be just opening up doors without announcing their entrance or a minimal knock, right? But just to open the door without being announced is definitely borderline weird behavior. And this is an example of where there's a lack of boundaries, lack of respect for privacy. Okay, so when you're dating a mama's boy or a daddy's girl, you will notice that they will be on the phone with their parents very frequently, if not 5 times a day to, every hour, right? Um, and it's just there's excessive communication. And oftentimes you will hear them say that they're best friends with their parents. And again, I think it's good if people for children in general to have good relationship with their parents. But I think there's a level of normalcy, okay? When it's to the point where your partner is emotionally dependent on their parents and they don't have there's not a clear line of boundaries and there's no privacy. Because, let's face it, folks, if you're in a relationship with your partner, there's going to be private things between you and your partner, private discussions, private uh, facts, and situations that you really don't want to share with anybody else. It's personal between you and your partner. But when you're in a relationship with a mama's boy or daddy's girl, they don't know the line of boundaries is not there. They anything private between you and your partner, they have no problems disclosing that to their parent. Okay, so basically there's no privacy. And so that could be very troubling if you're in a relationship with someone like that. Last but not least, D for disrespectful. They are disrespectful to their partners when they allow their parents to be rude and dismissive towards their partners. They treat their partners coldly when they're around their parents. They value their parents' opinions over their partner's opinions. Another interesting thing to note is that the mama's boy or daddy's girl will team up with the favored parent against the other parent. So there's a triangulation that's going on here, okay? Not in all situations, but in some. For instance, typically you may see a mama's boy and his mother form a tight bond while talking maliciously about the father. The father, in this case, becomes alienated by his son and his wife. This is a very hurtful and rude behavior and is considered a betrayal against the other parent that is being alienated. So the mama's boy or daddy's girl are not only disrespectful to their parents, to their partners, excuse me, but also to the other parent. So let me say this again. This is a very hurtful and rude behavior and is considered a betrayal against the other parent that is being alienated. So the mama's boy or daddy's girl are not only disrespectful to their partners, but also to the other parent. Okay. Um, from what I've seen in the mama's boys that I've dated, I haven't seen too much of that, where there's a triangulation that's going on. Um, but I have heard of situations where either the mama's boy or the daddy's girl, they'll form a tight bond with their favorite parent. So the mama's boy, it would be in the case of the mama's boy, it would be with his mother, and the daddy's girl with her father, to the unhealthy extent that they will take advantage of that uh, relationship and weaponize that against their other parent. So the mama's boy and the mother will team up against your partner's father, okay? And the daddy's girl will team up with her father against the mother. Okay, and unfortunately this does happen. And it's not healthy. The mother and father should always stand together as a team, as a strong union and team, regardless. There should never be another outsider or third party or anyone in the family that comes between the father and the mother, ever. Okay. And so when a relationship is fragmented and dysfunctional like this, when there's a dynamic, unhealthy dynamic going on between the mother and son and the father and daughter, sometimes you'll see this triangulation where the other parent is being alienated. And it's not a healthy place or a healthy situation. Okay. In summary, it's important to understand and recognize these signs and then decide if you want to continue investing more time in your partner, if he or she is a mama's boy or daddy's girl. If you decide to stay in this kind of unhealthy, toxic relationship, then it would be wise to seek couples counseling to address your partner's toxic behaviors and to address your potential codependence issues. Both of you will need to heal and learn self love. Your partner will need to establish healthy boundaries with his or her parents, learn to function independently and maturely as an adult, and work on developing his or her own identity and sense of self-worth. Ultimately, it will require the commitment for both of you to put forth the effort in building a healthy and successful relationship. Okay? Um, so let me just say this one more time. Both of you will need to heal and learn self-love. Your partner will need to establish healthy boundaries with his or her parents, learn to function independently and maturely as an adult, and work on developing his or her own identity and sense of self worth. Ultimately, it will require the commitment of both of you to put forth the effort in building a healthy and successful relationship. Okay. And for those of you who are married to a spouse who's a mama's boy or daddy's girl, I would recommend you go to marital counseling. Okay. It's going to be it will not get better, folks. Okay, this is a behavior that's been ingrained in them since they were children, and uh, it's going to be, I would say, a toxic relationship that you're going to be in if you continue in a relationship with someone who's a mama's boy or daddy's girl. And so it's important that your partner gets counseling. Okay, and then it's important that your partner also has to set the boundaries between them and their parent. Okay. While we can't control our parents' behaviors, we can't control anyone else's behavior but our own. But when we're in a situation, in the case of your partner who's a mama's boy or daddy's girl, they have to learn to be, uh, um, they have to learn their own identity and form the boundaries between them and their parent. Okay. And that's going to be very difficult to do. Like I share with all of you in the situation where my mama's boys, this ex-boyfriend I dated, where the mother threatened to commit suicide. That was very serious. Um, so who's to say how these narcissistic parents are going to behave? But clearly, it's a dysfunctional behavior and one that needs to be addressed. Okay, because after all, folks, we all want to be in a healthy, happy, successful relationship. Okay, so anyway, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you like this video, please click like and click share. If you have any comments, please put them below. Or if you have any questions, and please subscribe to my channel if so that you can be notified of all my future upcoming videos. Okay. So again, folks, thanks for watching, and I'll see you the next time. Okay, bye.